Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird couldn't get publishers to print their comics, so they created Mirage Studios to self-publish and prove themselves. Ironically, that rejection was a gift. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 sold out, giving them the money and freedom to build a franchise they could fully own. The success triggered a gold rush in indie comics, but many rushed imitators lacked the quality of TMNT. When the bubble burst, comic stores and small publishers folded, and the Turtles were unfairly lumped in with the crash. To gain legitimacy in the industry, Mirage licensed the Turtles to others. With the help of Mark Friedman, they struck deals with Playmates Toys and Murakami Wolf Swenson to create a toy line and a cartoon. This meant adapting the Turtles for kids, something that didn't sit well with fans of the darker comics. Even with the cartoon's success, Kevin and Peter still had to fight for the franchise's potential to be taken seriously. But the Turtles were starting their own Icarus-like rise, soaring into superstardom, changing to captivate a brand new audience, and setting the foundation for the next few decades. And it all started with their next leap, the silver screen. Join me today as we explore the peak of Turtlemania, the marketing storm that took over the world, in this 4th episode of History in a Half Shell. Before I dive into this episode, I recommend you read Andrew Farago's book, TMNT: The Ultimate Visual History. It's been a valuable source for these videos. Now, let's get back to our history series. The Turtles' journey to the big screen started in 1985, when New World Pictures pitched a sleazy Roger Corman version of the Turtles. But the creative duo didn't want their creation cheapened with guns and nudity. In the years that followed, comic book movies started bombing at the box office, making producers wary of projects like Howard the Duck or Masters of the Universe. Still, the comic's popularity attracted oddball attention. Comedian Gallagher and producer Cameron Kim Dawson pitched a version with actors like Billy Crystal and Howie Mandel playing turtles with human faces sticking out. Friedman rejected it, but Dawson wasn't done with the Turtles. He partnered with comedy writer Bobby Herbeck, who was working for producer Tom Gray at Golden Harvest. Bobby tried many times to convince Tom to take on the project, but the producer found the title too bizarre to take it seriously. It wasn't until Bobby asked Tom to check what his kids thought of the Turtles that Tom was convinced it was a safe investment. In the worst case scenario, they'd film it in Hong Kong with unknown stuntmen in rubber suits, sell the movie to Japan, and break even through residuals in the secondary market. Gray and Dawson secured the movie rights from Kevin and Peter in July 1988. But because they kept story approval rights on the project, Bobby had to travel to Northampton to pitch them ideas for a treatment. According to Bobby, only one of them would like an idea almost all the time. They wanted something more mature than the cartoon, and Bobby's pitches weren't connecting. 1989 came with its own marketing phenomenon, Bartmania. As a result, the Turtles were starting to lose presence on the shelves. This could have been the beginning of the end. Playmates told them from day one that most successful toy lines only lasted 3 years. 1989 was the middle year, so Mark felt they needed to act fast to keep the Turtles away from the discount bin. Knowing what to expect, Fred Wolf was getting ready to end the series with Season 3. After all, they were already hitting the desired syndication numbers. But Batman's success helped. Suddenly, comic book movies were viable again. So surely, it would be much easier to find a distributor and financing. Looking for someone who'd respect Mirage's vision, Gray reached out to Steve Barron and his producing company Limelight Entertainment. Steve was better known as a music video director at the time. However, he had also worked with Jim Henson's Creature Shop, and therefore had experience with some of the technical challenges they would need to overcome. Steve read the first graphic novels and used their pages to pitch his take directly to Kevin and Peter. For the first time in years, someone wanted to adapt their story as it was, and it was a huge relief. Unfortunately, Kevin and Peter still had problems with the script. Television writer Todd W. Langan was brought in to do a page 1 rewrite. He was picked because he was fast and cheap, and in just 10 days, he completed the first draft, which the duo approved. Steve convinced Jim Henson to work on making the Turtles a reality, but the existing technology required a radio-controlled upgrade to allow the Turtles to move around. $4 million from an already tight budget went into the performance system. This was a huge gamble for a film that hadn't secured a distributor yet. Tom struck a deal with 20th Century Fox for $6 million, but it fell through after the executives supporting the project got fired. This put additional pressure on Tom Gray. Henson's team was ready to ship the suits to North Carolina, but without funding, they'd be stuck. And Henson had a pay-or-play clause, meaning they'd owe him either way. Without Fox, Gray went to the then indie studio, New Line Cinema. They offered him $2 million instead of $6, which wasn't enough. Tom was desperate, so he turned to Golden Harvest's founder, Raymond Chow. He explained about Henson's contract and the possibility of a lawsuit. Gray promised Chow that the Turtles were going to be a success based on the popularity of the cartoon, and they'd recoup their investment. Chow then magically materialized the rest of the money, and the film got back on track. One curious detail about the casting for this movie was that Golden Harvest already had a contract with Phoebe Cates, and they were considering her to play April. Other options at the time were Elizabeth Shue and Julie Brown. Those last two options were a clear sign that April's ethnicity was finally settled. According to an interview that Peter gave at the time, April was always of a dubious ethnicity in the comics, fluctuating from very white to tan to semi-black to white again. But to him, as long as the character remained the same, he could live with the changes. They ended up casting the lesser-known Judith Hoag. Ironically, she almost skipped her audition until her Cadillac Man co-star, TMNT fan Robin Williams, convinced her to go. I already covered this movie and its deleted scenes in another video. But this video isn't just about the film. Big changes were also happening in publishing. Kevin and Peter didn't think the main TMNT book needed a label to keep kids away. They were proud of it and didn't feel it needed hiding. But fans of the cartoon had their own book, TMNT Adventures, published by Archie and produced by Mirage. Unfortunately, it had a very rocky start. Originally adapted from the show by Dave Garcia of Pandacon fame, the book struggled after just 2 issues. Kevin and Peter brought in friends Beth and Ken Mitroni to continue the run. Ken, in particular, was a good fit for the art, as he had an animation background and had just finished working on the first season of Tiny Toons. Still, the book ran behind schedule, and a cancellation seemed inevitable, and their contract with Archie would end up being breached. Still, the book was reaching an underserved audience and had a much wider reach than the black and white comic. So Ryan Brown started thinking about the potential of that book to do something different and meaningful. Kevin and Peter gave their okay for Ryan to go ahead and change the direction of the series. But there was one problem. Ryan needed someone to write the scripts for his plots. Looking around, Ryan found the perfect candidate for the book. Steve Murphy had been sharing studio space with them since Mirage offered to publish the Puma Blues under the Mirage banner, but he wasn't an official Mirage writer yet. Steve's book was an impressive post-apocalyptic story about the environment, and his editorials directed readers to urgent ecological causes to support. Steve's sensitivities were a great match for Ryan's ideas on influencing the next generation to care about the environment. This made sense, considering that many of the characters that would get introduced in the book would be animals or mutant animals. Murphy agreed, under one condition. He'd write under the pen name Dean Clarane, an anagram of his girlfriend's name. He wanted to shield his reputation from both adult readers and curious kids who might stumble upon his more mature work. Steve and Ryan would devise ideas, which Steve would later weave into full arcs, building continuity and character development, and officially breaking free from the cartoon's canon. Since Ken's job as an animator kept him very busy, he alternated in the art with Jim Lawson, another Mirage artist. Ken was joined by Gary Fields, who initially did inks and letters. Needing a permanent inker, Ryan brought in his friend Dan Berger, a name you have already heard in this series. Dan was Ryan's friend back in Ohio, and he was present when Ryan met Kevin and Peter in Detroit in 1985. Ryan moved when he took a job with Mirage, but Dan stayed behind to finish college in Cleveland. He moved to Massachusetts in 1989 to room with Ryan. He was expecting to get a factory job that could allow him to do freelance art on the side. He had no idea that he would expand responsibilities in a very short time beyond inking the adventure series. Dan was fast with inks, which helped the book stay on schedule, although sometimes they would get some help from other artists like Steve Levine. To complete the team was Archie Comics colorist Barry Grossman. Murphy's run embraced environmental themes and philosophy, putting the Turtles on globe-trotting adventures that introduced new characters and gave the series its own identity. The first original character, Man Ray, was based on Murphy himself in story and looks. In fact, he turned into a mutant manta ray, which was a clear nod to the flying mantas from the Puma Blues. To avoid echoing the cartoon, Ryan and Steve stopped watching it. This led to major personality shifts in the characters, who were treated more seriously in the comic. Their original plan was a 12-issue arc ending with the defeat of Shredder and Krang, breaking the show's repetitive cycle. But feedback about pacing led them to wrap it up in 9. On the second arc, and with a whole world to explore, Steve and Ryan introduced the Mutanimals and Mr. Null. This was the result of a request from Archie. They wanted a second Turtles book, but Steve and Ryan didn't want to make it about the Turtles, so they came up with the idea of the Mighty Mutanimals. The arc led directly into a 3-issue miniseries where the new group and Raphael would have to prevent an alien invasion. Adventures became Archie's top-selling title, with over 500,000 copies per issue. And fans were really engaged with it. They would send letters with their thoughts and suggestions, letters that proved that Ryan and Steve had hit the right combination of education with entertainment. At some point, there were so many letters that Dan and even Steve's girlfriend had to help answer them. Ironically, TMNT Adventures became more consistent and reliable than Mirage's flagship title. For over a year, the Turtles remained in exile in Northampton, not coincidentally, the birthplace of Mirage Studios. Mirage occupied a repurposed 2-story cutlery factory in Florence, Massachusetts, a city where most of the artists lived and worked. Since many Mirage creators had never been to New York, setting the comic in Northampton made sense. But the book's bi-monthly schedule made the exile feel endless. Kevin and Peter, now busy running a business, realized they needed others to help carry the story forward. But first, they had to wrap up their open arcs. That's how the Return to New York trilogy was born, a milestone that's been adapted in nearly every major TMNT version since. There was also pressure to reset the Turtles' status quo, not just for future comic stories, but to align with the upcoming film, which had its own take on the Turtles returning from exile. By 1989, Mirage was slowly bouncing back from the black and white comics crash, releasing smaller titles like Gizmo and the Fugitoid, and the hard-to-find Mirage mini-comics. As I mentioned earlier, Mirage was also publishing Steve Murphy and Michael Zulli's book, The Puma Blues. In their Mirage phase, a 6-issue arc was promised that would never be completed in this format. The book stopped coming out by issue 23, as Murphy was too busy with the Turtles. The story would find a conclusion in a 2015 collected edition. That year, Kevin and Peter were recognized with an Inkpot Award at San Diego Comic-Con, their first major formal honor from the comic industry. Receiving an award like this carried the hope that Kevin and Peter would no longer have to prove themselves, or their creation, to strangers. Around this time, Kevin Eastman began working on a graphic novel titled Underwear with Paul Jenkins and Mark Martin. However, the story wouldn't see the light of day until 1995. As for other Mirage staffers, Steve Levine and Ryan Brown continued doing most of the licensing artwork, especially for Playmates and Random House. 2 new artists joined Mirage in 1989, Dan Berger, whom I already spoke about, and A.C. Farley. Arnold Craig Farley was a technical illustrator who, after getting laid off, started working on his own comic shop while doing freelance work. One day, AC was working at the shop when Peter Laird came in. Peter noticed a painting behind AC based on Kafka's Metamorphosis, which he planned to sell at a comic convention. When Peter expressed interest in it, AC told him he needed to sell it for $2,000. Peter wrote a check on the spot, which made AC skeptical. That is, until he realized he was the Peter Laird. Later, Peter returned and asked if Farley wanted to draw comics. Farley agreed, but assumed formal contracts would follow. A month later, Peter showed up asking for the finished comic. That's when AC realized how informal things at Mirage could be. Farley quickly became known for his distinctive covers, especially for the collected editions. His first was Shell Shock, a special benefiting Chicago's literacy volunteers, and it featured another appearance by Usagi Yojimbo. Beyond covers and occasional stories, Farley also contributed licensing art and created the first ever 3D animation of a Ninja Turtle, thanks to Mirage funding his experimentation with early 3D software. This era deserves its own video, maybe even a whole series. After wrapping up their open storylines, Kevin and Peter stepped back from the main book, handing it over to friends and guest creators for the following 25 issues. It became one of the most creative and divisive periods in TMNT history. Some artists went for gritty realism, others leaned into cartoon absurdity. The result was a wildly inconsistent but fascinating run that, for a while, finally got the book back on schedule. With Kevin and Peter too busy to focus on the comic, this was their way of keeping the series alive until they could return. Though it's doubtful they knew just how long that would take. The guest era turned the book into an anthology of standalone stories or sagas that couldn't always fit with the canon. Letter pages disappeared during this run, making each issue feel like a prestige publication. These stories came out during the height of Turtlemania, and while the tone was inconsistent, they offered something none of the other adaptations could: wild, artistic interpretations. Having said that, bringing in artists and writers to play with the Turtles had two unfavorable consequences. One was that there weren't any Eastman and Laird stories anymore. For those who were buying the book because of its authors, the comic had turned into a showcase of Kevin and Peter's friends. The other consequence of this would be of a legal nature. The artists who came in to work on the Turtles created stories and characters without any formal contracts in place. This created a legal gray zone that would eventually become a minefield. I'll cover this in detail in the next episode. By 1989, the cartoon had reached its third season, hitting the magic number of 65 episodes. Though it was written as a possible finale, Fred Wolf had no plans to stop. He opened MW Dublin, a new facility in Ireland run by Jimmy Murakami, to help handle the growing production load. MW Dublin handled everything from storyboards to animation, and also worked on James Bond Jr. at the time. The third season was outstandingly long, with 47 episodes total. Francis Moss joined as assistant story editor, contributing to many classic episodes. In fact, the sidekick characters, Zach and Caitlin, were named after his kids. Joserio Nogueira joined the cartoon as character designer for 2 seasons. The show began pulling more characters from the comics, like Leatherhead, Rat King, Casey Jones, Metalhead, and Usagi Yojimbo, who also got an action figure that year. New original characters like Lotus Blossom and Mr. Og were also introduced. With so many episodes in production, Mirage often received approval requests that were too late to make changes. Kevin and Peter, feeling sidelined, gradually pulled away from the cartoon and focused more on the movie, where Steve Barron still valued their input. They continued to ensure the cartoon stayed on brand, but most creative control shifted to Playmates and Mirage staff. The success of the Turtles on TV definitely contributed to the toy sales, with characters crossing over from one medium to another. By 1989, Turtle-related merchandise was generating $250 million worldwide, a figure expected to double in 1990. The action figures were the third hottest selling toy line, right behind Barbie and Nintendo. Playmates expanded its figure line to keep up with demand, with designs coming from Mirage, Varner Studios, and Anaglyph. The collaboration was so fluid that a character could start at one studio and be refined by the others before finding a final form. Depending on their popularity, existing characters were sometimes preferred, but there was one special case this year: Usagi Yojimbo. The idea started at a convention, where Peter Laird and Stan Sakai were seated next to each other. Peter asked if Stan was open to making an Usagi figure for the toy line, and the rest is history. The figure sold 2.5 million units in its first year, boosting awareness of the character and his comic. With the toy and his cartoon appearance, Usagi found a whole new generation of fans. That year also saw the release of standout characters like Ace Duck, Krang, Genghis Frog, Baxter Stockman, Casey Jones, Leatherhead, Metalhead, Rat King, and General Trag. Playmates also started experimenting with more gimmicky, wacky action figures, like the Mouser, Rock and Roll Michelangelo, Sewer Swimming Donatello, and Break Fighting Raphael. And of course, 1989 gave us a wave of unforgettable vehicles, accessories, and playsets. The Turtle Cycle, the Foot Ski, the Pizza Thrower, the Foot Cruiser, the Flush-O-Matic, the Sewer Playset, and the Retro Mutagen Ooze, which came with minifigures.
Think up quietly! The Foot are about to ambush the Turtle's sewer playset, but thanks to the Turtle's periscope, it's no surprise! Take cover! The Foot are attacking with their sewer ball! Watch out, Turtles, or you'll wind up in the recovery room! Oh no! Retro Mutagen Ooze! The Shredder's up to his old tricks! And speaking of going up, the Turtles are taking the elevator to street level to make a call on Shredder using their private line! Reach out and crush someone! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle from Playmates!
To round up the releases, there were also some adorable plushies. The Turtles' success inspired Playmates and Fred Wolf to try and catch lightning again with the Barnyard Commandos, a toy line about radioactive farm animals. A cartoon followed in 1990, produced by Sax Finley and Fred Wolf, but it never made it into a full season. 1989 also brought us the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cereal, a product 2 years in the making. Ralston Purina based it on Chex, rebranding the squares as Chex Ninja Nets and tossing in marshmallows shaped like the Turtles' weapons. Each box came with a mini-comic illustrated by Peter Laird and Steve Levine. These issues introduced Wingnut and Man Ray. The latter would later be renamed Ray Filet for the toy line. Fortunately, you didn't have to buy endless boxes to collect all 3 comics. You could just write to the company and get the full set by mail. By 1990, TMNT cereal had become the top-selling cereal in the United States.
Look! Bringing kids our Power Pack new cereal!
But Shredder wants it!
We must take that power. Yeah, let me have it.
Let's give it to him!
Oh no, the Ninja Nest!
Chow down, dudes! It's Crunchy Ninja Nest with Ninja Marshmallows. A Power Pack Crunch! Part of your balanced breakfast.
Tastes great!
Now we crunch you!
Turtle power!
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cereal!
But this success was hard to swallow for some hardcore fans of the original comics, who considered the highly commercialized property dead to them. This was puzzling for Kevin and Peter, because, to them, as long as they had their black and white comic, everything else was just licensed material. Speaking of licensed products, Mark Friedman had his eyes set on a growing trend in kids' entertainment: video game consoles. Back in 1987, Mark struck a deal with Konami's Emil Heidkamp to develop a TMNT game under Ultra Games, a Konami-created label used to bypass Nintendo's limit of 5 games per publisher per year. Supplied with source material and a few cartoon episodes, Ultra set out to build a game loosely based on the show.
Fresh from the sewer, and into your Nintendo Entertainment System comes Ultra's version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now you can take control of these heroes in a half shell as they nunchuck, swim, and bazooka blast their way through sewers and streets. ridding the world of rival robots, wretched ruffians, and the evil Foot Clan forever. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're out of the sewers and available where Ultra games are sold.
Released in spring 1989 for the NES, the game sold over 4 million copies worldwide and was voted Best Theme/Fun and overall Best Game of the Year by Nintendo Power magazine. And it was hard. Even today, fans remember it as one of the most brutally difficult TMNT games ever. It was also known for featuring a Michael Dooney illustration that had previously appeared on a reprint of TMNT number 4.
Here's what the latest video game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, looks like on Nintendo. Mondo to the max. Cowabunga. Tubular. Radical. And here's what it looks like on Sega. So if you want to catch the awesome Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in action, you'd better buy Nintendo, because the only turtles you'll get on Sega are these. Nintendo, the entertainment system with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Thanks to that success, Konami signed a new deal with Surge Licensing to develop a 4-player arcade game, except in Japan, where it was released as a 2-player kit to keep costs down. The 4-player mode became one of its standout features. You could battle alongside your friends, or total strangers. The game became Konami's highest-grossing arcade title, holding the top spot for upright cabinets through 1990. It even earned a Diamond Award from the American Amusement Machine Association for sales in 1990 and 1991. Since the arcade game had a better performance than the NES game, the graphics and music were evidently superior. The music alone would always stand out whenever you entered an arcade. Thanks to this game's success, side-scrolling beat-em-ups became a trend until the release of Street Fighter II. By January 1990, the Turtles had finally made their way onto the BBC. However, due to UK censorship rules at the time, they had to be rebranded as the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, and all scenes featuring Nunchaku were edited out. A month later, Fleetway began reprinting the Archie Adventures under the Hero title. To avoid showing Nunchaku, they commissioned new covers for the issues, artwork that would go on to appear in several other European countries. Because Fleetway published the book every 2 weeks, they quickly ran out of source material and started producing original stories that should be considered a spin-off from the cartoon universe. In these UK-exclusive stories, Michelangelo was notably nunchaku-free. By this point, you may be wondering where the term Turtlemania came from. And I wish I had a definitive answer. It's widely believed that Mark Friedman coined it for marketing purposes, clearly drawing from the earlier pop culture frenzies like Beatlemania and, more recently, Batmania. Then again, the term was kind of a no-brainer by 1990. Whether Friedman invented it or not, the media had fully embraced it by the time the Turtles crossed the pond. The timing was perfect. The UK rollout lined up just months before the debut of the live-action movie. Filming for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie began in July 1989 in Wilmington, North Carolina. The turtle suits looked impressively realistic, but the technology behind them was still experimental. The radio-controlled helmets would act unexpectedly every time an airplane would pass by, something the Henson team managed to mitigate by changing into a military frequency. The suits were outfitted with onboard computers to control facial expressions, but they were heavy, hot, and exhausting to wear, turning each performer into a sweaty, shell-backed martyr. Facial movements were handled remotely by puppeteers, who spoke lines out loud during filming alongside the actors in costume, making all on-set audio unusable. The whole movie had to be dubbed in post-production. Of course, not all the suits were the same. There were lighter ones for the stuntmen, but that didn't make their job less dangerous. One of Donatello's stunt doubles was injured and replaced by Ernie Reyes Jr., a martial artist whose skills impressed the producers so much that they wrote him into the sequel. Filming wrapped in September 1989, with a few scenes left unshot. The budget had climbed to $13.5 million, and Steve Barron's requests for additional photography were denied. Trying to help, Jim Henson arranged for Barron to screen a rough cut for Disney's Jeffrey Katzenberg. Katzenberg was impressed and offered to distribute the film, but he did so behind producer Tom Gray's back. When Gray found out, he was furious and politely rejected the offer. Soon after, Barron's involvement with the film ended abruptly, and the film had to be assembled without him. By the end of 1989, public screenings with kids went so well that New Line Cinema had to scramble to double the theatrical prints before the release date. But internally, execs were worried. They found the film too dark, too violent, potentially damaging to the well-oiled Turtles machine Playmates and Fred Wolf had built. The movie was released on March 30th, 1990. When Friedman attended the premiere, and having heard all the concerns from the people at Playmates, he was prepared to accept the movie was going to bomb. But when he noticed the positive audience reaction, Mark finally felt an overwhelming relief. Who would have thought that a movie that dared to adapt a comic book could be a success? Certainly not the producers. And it wasn't even a mild success. It knocked Pretty Woman off the top of the box office, earning $25 million in its opening weekend. Part of this achievement could be traced to New Line Cinema's decision to release the movie just before the school holidays. As a result, it only dropped 28% in its second weekend. By the end of its run, it grossed $135 million, breaking all records for independent films. Before the release, skepticism ran so deep that even brand endorsements were hard to land. Friedman finally secured a deal with Burger King for a set of 4 TMNT Kids Club VHS tapes. But after the film's release, everyone wanted a slice. Pizza Hut backed the home video release with a massive $20 million campaign in October 1990. Even the soundtrack became a hit. It featured 2 charting singles, Spin That Wheel by High Tech 3 and Turtle Power by Partners in Crime. It would be safe to assume that anything with a turtle would sell well after the movie came out, but both the film and the soundtrack stood out for their quality. In the UK, the film retained Ninja in the title, but was heavily edited. Riding the movie's popularity, Mirage Studios and Mark Martin published a parody book titled Green Gray Sponge Suit Sushi Turtles, which I'll have to cover some other time. While the producers didn't have much faith in the movie's profitability, they had one thing on their mind. The Turtles were burning too bright, and they needed to recover their investment in the Henson Performance System. So whether the movie worked or not, there was always going to be a sequel, and they started working on one right away. The release of the movie unleashed Turtlemania, first in the US, and then around the world as the cartoon followed in its wake. 1990 became the unofficial Year of the Turtle. The sudden demand created a marketing tidal wave, leading to more than 1,000 licensed products. Lunchboxes, sticker albums, trading cards, Valentine's cards, board games, musical toothbrushes, Halloween costumes, backpacks, slippers, robes, alarm clocks, watches, bed sheets, pillowcases, pajamas, some that glowed in the dark, plus jewelry, including 14-karat gold TMNT cufflinks, shaving kits, and even fishing kits. And the rest of the world took notice. With global demand exploding overnight, Mirage Studios had to mobilize their lawyers to protect TMNT trademarks worldwide. But not every region was easy. Mirage refused to license the brand in Russia due to the lack of trademark protections. When a prospective agent said he could handle the infringement, Mark Friedman feared mafia involvement and walked away. The Turtles wouldn't officially hit Russian airwaves until 1993, during the collapse of the Soviet Union. But kids already knew them, through bootlegs, pirated tapes, and unlicensed merch. Another major challenge came from the Middle East, where a man had preemptively filed TMNT trademarks in multiple countries. When Mirage tried to license products there, they were sued. Rather than fight an expensive court battle, they bought the rights back, effectively paying a ransom to reclaim their own characters. The Turtles were very popular in the grocery aisles as well. There were simply too many turtle-inspired products this year to mention, but here are some of the most memorable ones. The most famous cookies came from a brand called Delicious. They made a whole range: sandwich creams, heroes and villains cookies, pizza and cheddar crackers, and even turtle shell wafers. One variety came inside a big plastic piggy bank, perfect for saving up for college, or more turtle products. The famous Cruncha-bungas were pizza-flavored corn snacks made by Ralston. Their ad was unforgettable. A stop-motion commercial from the same studio that brought us the California raisins.
Ninja Turtles, get ready! It's an attack! A snack attack! A crunchy snack attack! It's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pizza Cruncha-bungas! Snack attack! A snack attack, Jack! Going to pieces over crunchy little pizzas! A snack attack! Pizza Cruncha-bunga snacks! Sounds like a crunchy snack attack, dude! I take on any ninja who takes my crunchy food! Pizza Cruncha-bunga! Want some? Got some! Awesome! Cruncha-bungas!
There were also Popsicles ice cream bars with gumball eyes. You've probably seen these. They've been relaunched for almost every Turtles iteration since. And if I had to name one more, I'd pick Rolette's pork rinds. They were one of the product placements in the film, so they released pork rinds with a movie Turtles branding. '90 was Playmates' biggest year ever. They shipped over 100 million units, figures and vehicles combined, and with the increase in demand for Turtles, the few retail chains still not carrying the product were finally convinced to join the party. With such a strong demand, Playmates offered plenty. New characters that year were the Fugitoid, Mondo Gecko, Muckman and Joe Eyeball, Mutagen Man, Napoleon Bonafrog, Pizza Face, Ray Fillet, Scumbug, Slash, a Triceraton, Wingnut and Screwloose, Needlenose, and Killer Bee. Just like in 1989, the line borrowed another character from the indie comics world, Panda Khan, created by Monica Sharp and Dave Garcia. This was also the year Turtle variants really took off. Playmates discovered that no figure sold like the core 4, so in future waves, secondary characters would slowly take a back seat. New formats also hit the shelves. Wacky Action Turtles returned, along with Giant Turtles for extra shelf presence. And then there were the big ticket items. Fans finally got the Technodrome playset, along with vehicles like the Mutant Module, Turtlecopter, and the unforgettable Toilet Taxi. The Turtles model was working so well for Playmates and Fred Wolf that they began development on a new line for the next year. Toxic Crusaders, based on Troma's Toxic Avenger, for a 1991 launch. While Konami kept pumping out TMNT arcade cabinets through 1990, it became apparent they needed to bring the game to home consoles. So, they did. The NES port of the arcade game featured 2 brand new levels, new bosses like Tora and Shogun, and extended cutscenes. It also became famous for one thing: Pizza Hut's product placement. The game even came with a real Pizza Hut coupon. That same year, Konami released Fall of the Foot Clan for the Game Boy, the Turtles' first handheld adventure. It was a hit, and by the end of 1990, Nintendo Power Magazine voted it the best overall Game Boy game of the year. With the increasing demand for all things Turtle, a newspaper strip felt like the next logical step. For a brief moment, there were 2 concurrent TMNT comic strips, one in the UK and one in the United States. The first launched in April 1990 in the UK's Daily Mirror. It had its own continuity, but mostly pulled characters and lore from the cartoon. By October 1990, it expanded into Scotland's Daily Record. But by May 1991, the Turtles' popularity had started to dip, and the strip was cancelled. It delivered 4 long story arcs during its run, and was published 6 days a week. Meanwhile, Mirage Studios launched the American version in December 1990. Written by Steve Murphy under his alias Dean Clarrain, it blended elements from the cartoon, Archie comics, and Mirage lore. Initially, Murphy was joined by his TMNT Adventures collaborators, artists Ryan Brown and Jim Lawson, but eventually, the entire strip landed in the hands of Dan Berger. At first, it ran daily, with Sunday editions meant to be colorful standalone stories. But the production pace was brutal, so most Sundays were filled with fan art instead. Saturdays also shifted due to the workload of doing a daily strip. First into environmental tips, then into even more fan art. While kids loved seeing their art on the paper, the format wasn't popular with most newspapers, and the Sunday edition was only continued in some publications. Murphy originally envisioned it as an adventure strip, but after pressure from the Creators Syndicate, it pivoted to focus on comedy. At its peak, it ran in about 250 newspapers. By 1994, that number had plummeted, and by 1996, the strip was discontinued entirely due to low demand. Still, it's one more example of the Turtles trying every single format available. Another Turtle-powered publishing experiment in 1990 was a TMNT magazine, published by the Welsh Publishing Group and aimed squarely at younger fans. It featured brand new adventures, drawn by the same artists behind the Archie comics, but existed in its own continuity. The magazine launched in the summer of 1990 and followed a quarterly schedule until the summer of 1993. Back on TV, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles launched its 4th season in September 1990, delivering 26 episodes for CBS and 15 more for syndication. The CBS episodes had a unique structure. They were meant to air in pairs, one standard adventure followed by a character-focused episode. With new episodes airing both Saturday mornings on CBS and weekdays in syndication, the Turtles were on TV almost every day. Something curious happened with this season. Its premiere acted as a backdoor pilot for a side season known as Vacation in Europe. These episodes were produced earlier, but aired first in Ireland in 1990. In the US, they didn't show up until 1993 on the USA Network, which is why they're often grouped with Season 7, though they fit chronologically in Season 4. Behind the scenes, George Goodchild joined Josario Nogueira as a character designer under art director Frank Rocco. George was responsible for iconic designs like Mona Lisa, Tempestra, Slash, and even Shredder's mom. He'd remain with the series until its final episode. On the writing side, David Wise teamed up with Jack Mendelson as showrunners this season, while Francis Moss continued as assistant story editor. This season also marked the temporary departure of producer Walt Kubiak, who was replaced by Michael Alger, a change that would carry into the Season 5 premiere. Meanwhile, Fred Wolf and Playmates released a pilot for a new show, Toxic Crusaders, a spin-off based on Troma's Toxic Avenger. Though it wouldn't officially debut until 1991, the overlap between the two shows was obvious, right down to a theme song by Chuck Lorre and DC Brown. Plans for a second season were eventually scrapped after the show didn't gain enough traction. One of the wildest chapters in Turtle history began in 1989, when commercial songwriters Bob Bedgen and Godfrey Nelson got their hands on a copy of the original TMNT comic. They had a bizarre vision, a kid-friendly, Broadway-style musical. Think Disney on Ice, but cooler, for kids and adults. After a phone call with Kevin and Peter, Bob and Godfrey traveled to Northampton to perform their songs live. A few weeks later, they struck a deal with Mirage, but to pay the $50,000 licensing rights, they teamed up with producer and former Aerosmith manager Steven Leber and formed Tortoiseshell Spectacles. Of course, they needed to create the 4 main characters, so they went to Landmark Entertainment Group, some theme park veterans, to work on the suits and the helmets. The technology for the heads wasn't as sophisticated as the Henson Performance System, but it was a similar concept. The helmets had servos inside to control the mouths. Because of how noisy they were, the actors inside couldn't use microphones. The answer to this problem was simply to pre-record dialogues and songs. To manage the show's audio, they used a system with 32 tracks mixed live to match pre-recorded dialogue. Unlike Henson's setup, no puppeteers were required. They wrote custom software to sync the lip movements. While it's clear the system was glitchy, it was a clever and scalable solution, given the nature of the show. The producers made a $29 million deal with Pizza Hut to sponsor the Coming Out of Their Shells tour. $9 million went into producing the show, while the rest funded marketing. In exchange, Pizza Hut acquired exclusive rights for album giveaways. They acquired 3 million copies to distribute through their restaurants, and thanks to this push, the album reached triple platinum that same year. Apart from the cassette, Pizza Hut also sold merchandise for the tour. Between the video game, the musical, the cassette, and the movie video home release, Pizza Hut had a shell of a year. 2 sets of turtle suits were made. One was detailed for media appearances like the Oprah interview.
What's so special about Splinter?
What's so special about your dad?
However, the performing turtles were more practical and less detailed, as they needed to dance on stage. These performers would also need to act out their lines, sometimes a little too much, as they reacted to the pre-recorded dialogue and lyrics. Before their debut, the Turtles did some rehearsal concerts to fine-tune the show. During these performances, material for the making of was filmed. And you can tell, because the Turtles still had their shells. The performers were initially wearing a much better-looking suit that wasn't practical for dancing. 2 of them passed out during the show due to the high temperatures inside. Another problem they had was the big, heavy, chunky shells on their backs. It was after that hellish performance that they decided to throw the shells away. This is how the Turtles ended up with their denim looks and literally came out of their shells. The show officially opened outdoors at Radio City Music Hall in August 1990, with a limited 2-week run before hitting the road. As the tour progressed, the production was scaled down to fit smaller venues, including shopping malls and parking lots. The debut was broadcast live on pay-per-view, and a VHS followed. In 1991 and 1992, the tour went overseas, visiting Europe, Mexico, Canada, Puerto Rico, and Latin America. The musical's plot wasn't very smart. Shredder wanted to eliminate music, so the Turtles had to rescue April and then sing a little more. The plot didn't matter much. The songs were surprisingly decent, and for many kids, meeting the Turtles in real life was a big deal. The tour extended to 141 cities, grossing about $40 million in ticket sales. Not bad for a show originally planned for 40 stops. With Pizza Hut sponsoring the tour, it shouldn't be surprising that the main single out of the album was Pizza Power, a song that would later be included in the Turtles in Time video game. A sequel, Getting Down in Your Town, followed in 1992, mostly at Six Flags amusement parks. More on that next episode. Speaking of amusement parks, the Turtles also started their residency at MGM Studios in Florida in 1990, where they would perform for a few years. At this point, you'd be forgiven for thinking the Turtles only got stronger every time someone doubted them. In a way, the franchise was still overcompensating for its self-publishing roots, growing bigger and louder with every success. But growing this fast had consequences. Not every fan of the grim and gritty indie boom could appreciate catchy concert songs or dancing mascots. Wherever they turned, they saw versions of the Turtles they didn't recognize. Meanwhile, the comics still bore the names Eastman and Laird, but the stories weren't coming from them anymore. Still, angry fans alone couldn't steer the ship. The mainstream version of the Turtles was just that, a reinterpretation. Kevin and Peter planned to return to the comics, once the storm calmed down. But it wasn't just about fans anymore. Parents had buying power and were hard to ignore. The cartoon was carefully edited to keep complaints at bay. However, despite its toned-down violence, the first movie still felt too dark for some adults. This wasn't a complaint about a self-publishing comic. The cartoons and the movies were run by corporations, so producers had no choice but to listen to the parents. But violence wasn't the only red flag. The Turtles also rode a larger wave of marketing overload, and many parents began pushing back against what they saw as aggressive advertising targeting children. To be fair, this trend wasn't exclusive to the Turtles, but they were definitely a part of it. For kids, it was almost impossible to avoid advertisements. Companies had found a way to make kids loyal to brands from a very early age, not only on TV, but also at their schools. Sometimes, this loyalty went toward unhealthy foods, like burgers and pizza. Still, for many kids, especially those growing up in tough environments, the Turtles were more than just products. They were a safe haven, a reminder that underdogs could be heroes, that it was okay to be different. That was the real turtle power. Having said that, kids would sometimes imitate them in unexpected ways. After their appearance at the Oprah show, parents complained that kids were crawling into sewers to see if the Turtles were there. It's hard to imagine kids only thought about doing this after this appearance, but everything's possible. At the height of turtle power, it made sense to put that influence to good use. In April 1990, the Turtles participated in a national anti-drug campaign that aired simultaneously across the 4 major US networks. Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue was a crossover from all your favorite cartoons. It was financed by McDonald's and later released on VHS. The special opened with a personal message from President George H.W. Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush. The story followed a group of cartoon icons teaming up to help a girl rescue her brother from a dangerous slide into hard drugs. Among those characters was Michelangelo, voiced by Townsend Coleman, stepping up as one of the kid-friendly voices of reason. The special was later broadcast around the globe from 1990 to 1995, often introduced by the head of state or a non-profit leader of that country. While the story may oversimplify the problem it tackled, it's a must-watch just to witness that insane IP crossover. I'll do a video about it in the future. Back at Mirage, it was around this time that Kevin Eastman married his longtime girlfriend, April Fisher. It was also when Kevin and Peter Laird decided how to divide their ever-growing workload. Kevin, being more outgoing, became the public face of Mirage, doing interviews, attending conventions, and making appearances. Peter stayed behind the scenes, quietly managing the day-to-day operations. Despite their different roles, they continued making creative and business decisions together. Mirage Studios kept expanding during Turtlemania, not just to handle the wave of licensing deals, but also to connect with the fans. The studio received mountains of letters and made a genuine effort to respond to them, often sending back autographed photos. Life wasn't all business, though. The Mirage crew found time to bond outside the studio. Every now and then, they'd hit the road on biker trips, one time even riding all the way to San Diego Comic-Con. For Kevin Eastman, the success of the Turtles didn't earn him the recognition he'd hoped for from his peers. But it gave him something else, the opportunity to fix what he saw as broken in the comics industry, and put the creator's Bill of Rights into practice. If he could give something back to his community, then Turtlemania would help him fund it. A bit ahead of his time, Kevin's logic was sound. Why should creators work for the big two when they could own their own creations? Kevin believed that if freelancers stopped working on someone else's characters and focused on the graphic novel they had inside them, comics could finally evolve into a respected art form. At first, he thought Mirage could be the place that allowed artists to spend time working on their masterpieces. But Peter Laird, already exhausted by lawsuits and settlements, wasn't interested in bringing that kind of stress in-house. However, he gave Kevin his blessing to start a new company. Kevin moved to the floor beneath Mirage Studios to create Tundra Publishing. Kevin was really thinking outside of the box with this company. He didn't want to be limited by the common mistakes of the comic industry, so he hired people from other industries. People who could think broader than the small comic book community. This would lead to Tundra advertising in magazines and other unusual places for comic books. He even brought in his uncle Quentin, the same one who helped make TMNT #1 a reality, as the company president. Quentin had experience in printing, but nothing could prepare him for Tundra's chaos. Kevin devised the 80-20 rule. Tundra kept 20% of net profits, and creators kept 80%. Of course, any advertisement money would come out of that 80%, but that was ultimately up to the creator. Quentin complained about that rule because it didn't leave enough margin for error, and he didn't think any business could survive such a split. But to Kevin, there was no reason to worry. Once they started publishing high-quality masterpieces, it would be a matter of time until these properties made their way into Hollywood and replicated the success of Turtlemania. They just needed to do the marketing right, and the business would eventually become profitable. The plan was sensible enough from the start. They would focus on quality over quantity, publishing only 5 projects per year, a number that would gradually increase up to 15 titles in total. This was the limit they considered to maintain focus and production quality. Then, Kevin went to a convention and ended up accepting 70 projects for the first year without any due diligence. Tundra did attract top talent like Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, Dave McKean, Scott McCloud, Mike Allred, and James O'Barr. One of Kevin's inspirations was Heavy Metal magazine, and he wanted to connect with that older comic reader. To do this, he wanted to attract European talent and be able to sell Tundra's projects overseas. This was his reasoning for funding Tundra UK. Thanks to Tundra UK, Kevin ended up working with Simon Bisley. Kevin was already working with his friend Eric Talbot on a project titled Melting Pot, which was supposed to get printed by Mirage, only making it into one mini-comic. The duo then welcomed Simon Bisley, who completely changed the look and feel of the comic. Unfortunately, the project would take too long to finish, and would end up getting printed by another publisher after Tundra's demise. More about that in the next episode. Kevin then bought a music studio in Maine that was rebranded Tundra Studios. His idea was to be able to interact with musicians to make multimedia projects as well as audiobooks. Unfortunately, this studio went out of business shortly after the purchase. With the intention of pitching Tundra's projects to Hollywood, Kevin moved to LA, where he also expanded into Limelight Productions, Steve Barron and Simon Field's company. Through Limelight, Kevin wanted to expand to TV and the silver screen. Unfortunately, after a year of disappointing results, with talent not delivering the pages they were already paid for, Tundra had to start experimenting with 50-50 contracts to minimize the losses. Furthermore, people started taking advantage of the cracks in the system. They knew that they could simply talk with Kevin to get away with it whenever Quentin said no to anything. It turned out that Kevin had difficulties saying no, especially when it came to empowering artists. Since Tundra didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the business, Kevin decided not to hire editors. In hindsight, this was a big mistake. However, Kevin did put some of his friends in other roles to keep track of the artists. Mark Martin came in as art director, while other friends like Paul Jenkins and Steve Bissett helped him on the production side of things. Kevin has said in the past that he spent $14 million of his own money on Tundra, securing high-quality artists for material that the company would never own. Tundra struggled financially from the start. The market for avant-garde comics was niching down by 1991, when superhero comics were becoming increasingly popular. To make things worse, they had problems keeping egos in place, with artists and distributors taking advantage of Kevin's altruistic intentions. Perhaps because of all this drama, Kevin eventually had to let Quentin go. According to Bissett, Kevin was frustrated by the comic industry not recognizing his work at Mirage, and this lack of recognition followed him to Tundra. From the perspective of History in a Half Shell, the Tundra years are important because they distance Kevin and Peter even more. Peter was left behind trying to manage the publishing side of Mirage, while Kevin had more urgent obligations making Tundra work. And then there was the additional difficulty of Kevin living across the country. Still, the little time Kevin had left for Mirage, he spent on reviewing and approving creative decisions and toy designs. As you can imagine, with Tundra's financial unsustainability, the publisher collapsed by 1993, something I'll explore in the next episode. But this wouldn't be the end of Kevin's dreams. It was around 1991 that he started negotiating the purchase of Heavy Metal magazine, his inspiration all those years ago. Kevin's intentions are something to be admired. After the success of Turtlemania, he could have retired, but he chose to put money into his ideas for independent creators. Around this time, he also started building the Words and Pictures comic book museum, where he would display some of the 4,000 pieces of comic book art he'd collected over the last few years. But more on that next episode. Overall, it's interesting how Turtlemania kept Kevin and Peter away from the drawing board, and when things started getting under control, Kevin prioritized his altruistic dreams over drawing again. After the massive success of the first movie, the producers rushed into a sequel, eager to capitalize on all the research and development already done. But to keep Turtlemania alive, the movie had to be out within the year. The producers felt the need to acknowledge the complaints from the parents' groups, and they were set on making the movie brighter, funnier, and closer to the cartoon. This clashed with Kevin and Peter, because for them, there was nothing to fix in the record-breaking first film. Unfortunately, the producers felt they knew better, and went ahead in that direction. They hired Michael Pressman as the director because he had experience in successful comedy sequels and also happened to share their view about toning down the violence and brightening up the sets. Todd W. Langan returned as the sole screenwriter for the sequel, which he finished by September 1990. This was followed by 53 days of production and 3 months of post-production, which included dubbing. The producers initially wanted to include Bebop and Rocksteady in the movie, as there was a need to show how the ooze could be used for evil. However, since the ownership of those characters was a little muddy, Kevin and Peter insisted on using new characters instead, and this is how Toka and Razar were created for the movie. Another addition to the film was Kino, a character that was created for Ernie Reyes Jr. Judith Hoag didn't return for the sequel for several reasons. She had demanded to give the story more substance. She was also asking for a salary increase and better working conditions on the set. Since Golden Harvest already had some negative feedback from their focus group about Judith, they decided to recast April. The new actress was Paige Turco in her first feature film. The sequel was again shot at Coral Coast Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina. Production designer Roy Forge Smith built the now iconic Subway Den, which would appear in the third movie and the live-action series. With a $25 million budget and most of the groundwork already laid, the producers decided to invest in another best-selling soundtrack. They brought in Vanilla Ice, who was very popular at the time and also happened to be a big fan. He, of course, contributed the Ninja Rap song. The sequel, titled The Secret of the Ooze, hit theaters on March 22, 1991, and ran for 40 weeks. Box office-wise, the film grossed $78.6 million, opening with $20 million, which wasn't bad for the budget they had. The movie had a very successful VHS release that year, plus a special behind-the-scenes release. Most kids loved the sillier tone and didn't mind the shift in direction. But to this day, Peter Laird still regrets that the producers learned all the wrong lessons from the first film. Video game consoles continued releasing games with the Turtles. Game Boy released Back from the Sewers by the end of 1991. It was a sequel to the Fall of the Foot Clan game. The original arcade game was also ported to computers under the title Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles: The Coin-Op, and made available for the Amiga, Commodore 64, Atari ST, and MS-DOS. MS-DOS also got a unique game that year, TMNT Manhattan Missions. This one was a blend of the first movie and Mirage universe, which made it very different from the other titles in the market at the time. It was developed by Distinctive Software and published by Konami. The gameplay was also different. Players could choose missions in any sequence and had a real-time 48-hour timer to complete them all and defeat the Shredder. It was also the first game to feature Casey Jones. In June 1991, Data East released a pinball machine that included turtle action figures in its design. Lastly, Nintendo released TMNT 3, the Manhattan Project, in Japan by the end of 1991, with a US launch following in 1992. The game's story would later be adapted for another platform, but more on that in the next episode. In 1991, Konami released a conversion kit for arcade owners to turn existing cabinets into Turtles in Time. This made the game more affordable and accessible, contributing to its success and popularity. Video games had become one of the most effective ways to spread Turtlemania, reaching households where the comics, toys, cartoons, or movies hadn't, generating new lifelong Turtle fans. After 11 issues of TMNT Adventures, Steve Murphy realized something. There was no editorial oversight. No one was telling them what to do, allowing him to mature the book alongside its readers. The comic grew more serious every year, tackling real-world issues the Turtles couldn't always punch their way through. Readers reacted appropriately, starting serious conversations in the letter pages. One of the most common requests was to introduce a female mutant character. This may have been the genesis of Ninjara. She was created by Michael Dooney and Steve Murphy, and she organically evolved into being Raphael's girlfriend. With environmentalism striking a chord with young readers, Murphy began using the comic to push those themes, so much so that he gradually lost interest in the Puma Blues. Here, he had real reach and the chance to inspire a generation to care for the planet. Murphy continued evolving his version of the TMNT, phasing out Bebop, Rocksteady, and Krang, making Shredder a real threat, and training April as a fighter. Ken Mitroni had to leave the book as his animation work ramped up. In his place came Chris Allen, an Archie bullpen artist who was brought in for a fill-in issue. It went so well that Chris quit his job at Archie and stayed with TMNT Adventures until the end, with only the occasional guest artist. Steve and Chris would end up doing the book the Marvel way. Steve would provide an outline of the story at the beginning and dialogues at the end. Internationally, it wasn't just Fleetway reprinting the book. The comic was translated and sometimes modified in many markets, with some of them, like the Mexican version, branching on its own continuity. By the time Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles hit Season 5, episodes were being produced exclusively for CBS. The season kicked off with a primetime special in August 1991, the hour-long Planet of the Turtleoids. After that, 20 more episodes aired in the usual Saturday morning back-to-back format. New characters introduced this season included Mondo Gecko, Mutagen Man, Muckman, Ground Chuck, Dirtbag, Chrome Dome, Wingnut, and Screwloose. Jack Mendelsohn returned as sole showrunner, and Walt Kubiak returned as producer. Joserio Nogueira left the show, leaving George Goodchild in charge of character design and art direction. This was also the last season for Francis Moss, who had been assistant story editor. It would be the final season produced under the Murakami Wolf Swenson name. Starting with the following season, the studio would rebrand as Fred Wolf Films. (1991) was another massive year for Playmates, but the focus shifted from new characters to Turtle variants. That's not to say there weren't new faces. This year saw the debut of Anthrax, Chrome Dome, Dirtbag, Ground Chuck, King Lionheart, Toka, Razar, Sergeant Bananas, Space Usagi, Super Shredder, Tattoo, Walkabout, Worm, Zack, and a deluxe version of Krang's android body. Space Usagi was another character borrowed from Stan Sakai. The figure hit shelves before the character ever appeared in the comics. But with a Bucky O'Hare cartoon about to drop, Playmates figured it was the perfect time for another rabbit in space. I'll talk more about Space Usagi in the next episode. Gimmicky figures this year included Talkin' Turtles and Head-Droppin' Turtles. There were also many vehicles. It's worth noting that Playmates had a bit of friendly competition with themselves. The Toxic Crusaders figures, sculpted by the same studios, ended up looking almost interchangeable with the TMNT line. The Secret of the Ooze brought some memorable tie-in products to the grocery aisle. One standout was the Chef Boyardee Super Shredder figure. This was a mail-away exclusive, a black and silver repaint of the standard figure. Consumers only needed 20 proofs of purchase from their TMNT canned pasta. Another classic was Hostess's Turtle Pies. Released in February 1991 to coincide with the movie, these were meant to be on shelves for just 20 weeks, but due to stock overflow, they lasted a bit longer. However, the pies had a shelf life of 7 days, so it was the kind of product you wanted to find fresh. The pies were filled with vanilla pudding and covered in green glaze. Each came with trading cards, stickers, and one of 9 wrappers. There were also 4 mail-away exclusives: t-shirts, belt buckles, clickers, and a painter's cap. By the end of their run, Turtle Pies had brought in $5 million and then vanished forever.
We're heroes in a half shell, we're baking a surprise. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Pies. Fresh from the sewers to you. Their minds are delicious, you know that's true. Because they're filled with mutagen goo. That's vanilla pudding, dude. They've got the tastiest, flakiest, greatest crust. Even better than on pizza. And it's green like us. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Pies. Fresh from the sewers to you. Radically sweet.
They can't beat these.
And there's a free turtle sticker inside, that's neat. New from Hostess. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Pies. Fresh from the sewers to you.
By this point, you should know that it wasn't really lonely at the top for the Turtles. The Simpsons debuted in 1989 and immediately became a success, not on Saturday mornings, but in primetime. Initially, Bart Simpson was the show's breakout character, and Bartmania started going head-to-head with the Turtles for kids' attention. Bart even made it into The Secret of the Ooze, which should give you a clue about how important Bart was at the time. Interestingly, both Turtlemania and Bartmania peaked around the same time. As The Simpsons shifted focus more toward Homer, it stopped competing for younger viewers. However, since The Secret of the Ooze clearly targeted younger kids, The Simpsons became a natural graduation point for slightly older audiences. Ultimately, that shift may have helped shrink the Turtles' core demographic, quietly setting the stage for Turtlemania's slow decline in the years to come. Mirage slowly started waking up from their money coma with a handful of new projects. A new volume of Turtle Soup came out, this time in color and printed on glossy paper. It ran for 4 issues and served as a platform for different artists to tell short turtle stories. Black and white collected editions of TMNT Volume 1 were also published during these years, ending in 1991, when they were almost caught up with current issues. While an 8th paperback was planned, Mirage decided to discontinue the collection for reasons that will become apparent in the next episode. Michael Dooney's Challenges also came out in 1991, a character study graphic novel that explored each turtle and Splinter. Over at Dark Horse Comics, the Turtles made their first crossover with the Flaming Carrot. A sequel would be published by Mirage a couple of years later. By the end of 1991, the guest era was winding down, and the idea of bringing things back to normal had started to take shape. Kevin and Peter were doing very well thanks to Turtlemania. Unlike many comic creators before them, they actually made enough money to enjoy life and indulge a little. Peter started collecting motorcycles. Kevin bought a tank. While Kevin started Tundra to empower comic creators to publish their own work, Peter had a different approach to giving back. Peter's path was more conservative. He was often approached to invest in comic projects, but didn't have the time to properly vet them. To do it right, he founded the Zarek Foundation, an organization that awarded grants to support self-publishing comic creators, funded entirely by Turtlemania money. The goal of the Zarek Foundation wasn't that different from Tundra's: promote creative independence and freedom of expression in comics. and it also extended to causes like environmental and literacy efforts. Twice a year, the foundation would review submissions and give grants to around 4 to 9 creators. It wasn't a publishing deal, just enough money to get their comic out into the world. The Zarek Foundation started in 1992 and lasted almost 20 years, eventually shutting down once webcomics became a viable alternative. The success at Mirage wasn't limited to just the founders. Artists were paid royalties and almost full-page rates, even on reprints. Anytime someone submitted a character that made it into the Playmates line, they'd get 50% of the royalties. This included several characters from the Archie adventures. Looking back, it's striking how Mirage's early deal with Solson Comics only benefited Solson, while everything that came out of Turtlemania boosted the Turtles themselves. A true testament to Mark Friedman's talent as an agent. Unfortunately, Turtlemania was also open season for legal headaches. Mirage was constantly juggling 5 to 8 active lawsuits. These ranged from international trademark battles, bootleg merchandising, cease and desist letters, etc. One guy said he gave Peter the idea for the Turtles while riding a bus and was supposedly paid $100,000 in cash. After seeing how much money the Turtles made, he demanded a check for $40 million. When Mirage didn't pay, he made threats, showed up in Northampton, got arrested, and then had the nerve to call Mirage asking for bail money. Then there were battles on the business side. Fred Wolf started claiming a larger share of the profits and royalties than Kevin and Peter believed he was entitled to. Mirage accused him of withholding financial statements and not honoring royalty obligations, and this led to a lawsuit around 1992 that would result in another lawsuit from Fred Wolf that I'll need to talk about in the next episode. To add to the pressure of running a company under these conditions, they were also approving from 15 to 40 license deals per week. So, in June 1991, Kevin and Peter brought in someone they trusted, their accountant, Gary Richardson. He became CFO of Mirage and took over the financial and legal mess, managing the growing business with a small but focused team. This let Kevin and Peter get back to the creative side of things, but bringing order to Mirage came at a cost. Gary's changes would ultimately alienate many of the creators who had long respected Kevin and Peter. Some would even call it a betrayal. To complicate things further, another creator-driven independent publisher was about to eclipse Mirage, forcing them to compete in the superhero world. And to top it all off, the industry was headed straight into another wave of market saturation and a second comic book crash. Turtlemania was starting to burn out. The demand for the characters began to lose steam, and with fewer business opportunities, the franchise entered a slow decline, one that would almost erase the Turtles from the collective consciousness. Come back for the next episode of History in a Half Shell, where I'll explore the decline years, 1992 to 1999, and how they impacted both the franchise and Kevin and Peter's partnership. If you've made it this far, let me know you're still awake by dropping a turtle power in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.